Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Introduction to Philosophy. This week, we're going to continue and conclude our unit on the philosophy of mind. So, specifically, we're going to be looking at the physicalist responses to the mind body problem today. So, remember how the dualists were insisting that we have to think of the mind and the brain separately, right? There's at least two different ways of conceiving of these two things. And if the substance dualist is right, they're two separate things entirely. Well, the physicalist wants to say, no, there really just is the physical. So, physicalism then is just the view that all things are physical and should therefore be explainable with physical explanations. So, let's look at the variety of theories on offer then. First up, we have identity theory. It seems pretty straightforward, but there is some nuance to the view. Identity theory just says that in some way, the mind is identical to the brain, right? So, identity. The mind is identical to the brain. So, all of your thoughts, your beliefs, your memories, etc., those are really, in some sense, identical to some phenomena in the brain. But in what way are these mental phenomena identical to brain phenomena? Well, here is where we get the nuance. Here's where we get the division in the view itself. So we have token identity theory and type identity theory. To understand the difference, we need to understand the difference between tokens and types generally. In philosophy, we make this distinction along levels of specificity or generality. So a token refers to a single particular, while a type refers to some class or group of things. So the token identity theorist then is one who argues that a particular mental state is identical with a particular brain state. It's like a one-to-one kind of relationship. So for every feeling, thought, etc. that you have, there is some one state of the brain that corresponds with it. Right? One feeling, one thought, etc., to one brain state. Tokens are identical. Type identity theorists, on the other hand, think that mental states are identical with types of brain states. So feelings of pain, for example, might be identical with brain states A, where feelings of pleasure might be identical with brain states B. Right? These are general ways of talking about the phenomena, general ways of talking about pain, pleasure, etc. So general ways of talking about feelings and other kind of mental phenomena related to general ways of talking about brain phenomena. Okay, so these two generalities are identical, not tokens. So why do we have this kind of distinction? Well, it's because token identity theory is very easy in a certain respect. Right? It's easy to discover how this identity is supposed to work. Whatever mental state that you have right now just is identical to whatever's going on in your brain right now. We don't have to think about it very much. Right? But the problem is that we can't extend those kinds of explanations to account for other people's mental phenomena. Right? Other people are going to have different brain states than you are. And therefore, your view, where you say, oh, well, my mental state right now is identical with my brain state right now, tells you nothing about how to understand other people's mental states. It tells us nothing in terms of the identity between their mental phenomena and their brain phenomena, right? So it's not very informative in a general way. Type identity theory, then, is useful for generalizing our explanations about mental phenomena to include other people. So, with type identity theory, we can make claims like experiences of pain are identical with this kind of brain state. And philosophers of mind typically say it's C fibers here. We now know there's a lot more to the story than just C fiber activation, but it's a holdover from the old days, right? So, we can make claims like that, though. Pain is C fiber firing. Now, me saying that pain is C fiber firing doesn't mean that I have to know anything about my particular C fiber firing. I'm not saying that my specific pain is my specific C fiber firing. I'm saying pain in general is in general C fiber firing. And can you see that's much more useful for making claims about other people's mental phenomena as well? So now we can explain our mental phenomena together using the same story. But this brings about another kind of problem. This is the problem of multiple realizability. So when we make our identity claims about types, we end up introducing some kinds of exclusions as well. So for example, if we say that pain just is C fiber firing, that means that if you don't have C fibers, you can't be in pain, right? So it introduces this notion of exclusion as well. The problem of multiple realizability is that it seems like there might be multiple ways to go about generating the same kind of mental phenomena other than just, let's say, C fiber firing, right? So what if, for example, machines could be conscious? Well, if that's possible, they're not going to have brains like ours. But that means, by the type identity theorist, really any identity theorist, that they can't possess any mental states. Those mental states cannot be brain states, right? And therefore, by the lights of identity theory, they don't have mental states. But if machines could be conscious or feel pain or something like that, well, that suggests that identity theory is false. It suggests that there are multiple ways of realizing mental phenomena other than brains. Now, maybe you think machines can't ever be conscious. Well, if that's the case, what about alien life, right? You can conceive of there being alien life. It doesn't even have to be advanced, just capable of feeling pain, for example, that do not have brains like ours. Maybe they don't even have brains at all. We don't know. It's alien life, right? Well, if identity theory is true, those creatures, those aliens, cannot have mental states because they don't have brains. And there seems to be something strange there. Most people who argue for multiple realizability typically don't go as far as machines or aliens. They talk about other animals, right? Octopi, for example, seem to respond to pain. They seem to exhibit the exact same kinds of behaviors we do. Maybe not the exact same kind, but relatable kinds of behavior to certain kind of stimuli as we do. Nevertheless, their brains are very dissimilar to ours. Well, if the identity theory is true, it doesn't seem like it's going to be able to accommodate that difference, right? It doesn't seem like it's going to be able to accommodate that difference, and therefore, it seems reasonable to say that octopi don't have pain. But that seems wrong, right? That's the problem of multiple realizability. So token identity theory then is largely dismissed because it doesn't give us enough generality from which we can make claims about other people's minds, right? It doesn't give us enough tools for the explanations we want to make, right? But type identity theory seems to prevent any non-brain having or different brain having individuals from having minds at all. Functionalism, then, is the view that comes about directly in response to this problem of multiple realizability. So rather than identifying mental states exclusively with brain states, functionalists identify mental states with something that they call functional roles. Okay, so what is a functional role? Well, in short, it's this causal process that goes on within some structure. It doesn't have to be a brain, that takes an input from the world and reliably, according to some probabilistic rules, generates a mental state and likely some kind of behavioral output based on that, right? So it's a way in which an organism, creature, whatever, responds to the world or other internal states in a more or less reliable fashion, right? So the experience of pain, for example, just is then the causal process that we undergo when we're subjected to certain kinds of inputs. like noxious stimuli, like being uh, pricked with a pin, right? That produces certain outputs, like behaviors like avoidance, even. So, the benefit of functionalism then is that it allows for us to capture all of these things that might not have brains like ours that we nevertheless want to say exhibit mental phenomena. We don't care anymore how the mind is realized. We just care that it has the same function, right? That it's doing the same kind of thing. You can do the same kind of thing being composed of any number of different substances. So for the functionalist, then, it doesn't matter whether you're a human with a brain, as we see on the top here, or whether you're some kind of AI driven by purely silicon chips. It doesn't matter so long as the proper functional role is being performed between input and output. So, functionalism makes good sense out of this problem of multiple realizability, but there are also some objections to it as well. The one we'll consider today is called the Chinese nation objection. We get this from Ned Block, philosopher Ned Block. In short, Block is going to accuse functionalism of being too liberal. So he thought, and the functionalists thought, that identity theory is too conservative, right? It blocks off too many different things from having minds, right? You don't have a brain like mine, therefore you don't have a mind. The functionalist goes in the other direction, right? They say, no, I'm going to allow for many different things to have minds. All that matters is that they're able to express this kind of functional role. Block thinks they've gone too far. They're now allowing too much in. So they're going to end up having to grant the status of mind to things that really the view should not be doing. So his objection then, the Chinese nation objection, is supposed to exemplify that particular complaint. So here's how it works. Suppose that every person in China is given like a walkie-talkie, some means of communicating with one another, and they are taught to act just as neurons do, passing on information depending on the activity of their neighbors, etc. Assuming perfect precision, it would seem that the Chinese nation is exhibiting the same sort of functional role a brain might exhibit in response to some stimuli. Okay, so in Bloch's actual writing, it's a bit more detailed than this. There are satellites, low orbit satellites that display to the entire Chinese nation what the state of the machine is at that current point, because you also need that in order to realize a functional role. Nevertheless, the idea is just this. With enough people participating in exactly the right way, it seems like you could realize the same kind of functional role that a brain state does. And if that is possible, by the functionalist's own view, the Chinese nation at that point would itself have a mental state. Now, to be clear, that does not mean, right, the claim is not that the individuals within the nation would have mental states. It's that the nation itself would be a mental state. It would be, or at least be, exhibiting a mental state itself. Clearly, Bloch says, that's not right. Clearly, we do not want to say that this nation, the nation itself, can have a mind or can be a mind, right? There seems to be something wrong. Functionalism then is allowing too much in. Now, some functionalists just want to say, look, if that level of coordination is possible, and there's good reasons to think that it's not, but if it were possible, then why not? Sure, if it genuinely were possible, why not? All right, so it's this Chinese nation objection doesn't necessarily mean that functionalism is wrong, but it means that many of us might think it's untenable given certain kinds of consequences that fall out of it. Okay, now something completely different. Behaviorism. Behaviorism is the view that there's nothing more to mental phenomena than behavior. right? So when we talk about pain, for example, really there just is a tendency to react in certain ways to certain stimuli, right? I have a tendency when pricked with a pin on my finger to say ah, to jerk away from the needle, to say ow, right? But there's nothing more to being in pain than that. If behaviorism is true, there's nothing more to having a mental state. There's nothing more to mental phenomena over and above the behaviors themselves. So the main advantage of this view is that everything is out in the open, right? We can all see what the things are that we're talking about. When we're talking about mental phenomena as dualist, for example, it's going to be really hard to investigate those things, right? We saw with Princess Elizabeth's objection, for example, we're not even going to be able to describe how these two things interact, much less give a full account of what the non material is. But with behaviorism, everything is nice and out in the open. All of us have equal access to the things that we're talking about. So, under behaviorism, then, we can objectively measure mental phenomena. There's just no such thing as like a subjective mind. So, it has some advantages where giving explanations is concerned. But many also think that that advantage is a detriment, right? It's a sign of something bad as well. Under behaviorism, there is no such thing as a private mental life. But if there are things like beliefs, right, then it seems like, uh, well, if the behaviorist is right, they're only behavior. But how does that work for something like qualia, like we saw last week, right? This what its likeness that comes with experience, the redness that I experience when I see the apple myself, right? When I see the red apple myself, there is this feeling of redness. How is that capable of being condensed into behavior alone? It seems like the behaviorist, in other words, miss something about our mental lives. The identity theorists want to take that thing and reduce it to something like a brain state. Okay, maybe we don't like that. Maybe we do. But at least they're trying to provide some kind of account. The behaviorist wants to say there is no thing like that at all. There's only the behavior. We're not even trying to tell you that it's something you didn't originally think it was, right? Further, a problem that's not on the slides here is that many of us want to think that, well, there are things behind our behavior. I exhibit this certain kind of behavior for a reason. And those reasons are typically to do with some kind of internal mental state, right? There's something behind the behavior. And behaviorism doesn't really provide us with the means of accommodating that fact. Finally, we have eliminative materialism. So, eliminative materialism is sort of the ultimate physicalist position, right? They want to say we are not in the business of trying to explain how mental phenomena are actually physical phenomena. Instead, we're in the business of showing you that this notion of mental phenomena was wrong to begin with, right? It's a mistaken way of thinking. It's folk psychology, right? Folk psychology is meant to carry a sort of pejorative element here. It's meant to say, this is the way of thinking about ourselves that people who have no training think, right? This is the way that people with no training think. So things like beliefs, thoughts, experiences, etc., that's a sloppy conception of psychology that the layperson uses. That's not how things actually are. So the eliminative materialist wants to insist that folk psychology is scientifically uninformed and should thus be eliminated. So forget about trying to say how mental phenomena are actually just in some way physical, like the identity theorists or the functionalists were doing. Instead, the eliminative materialist wants to argue we should dismiss these conceptions altogether. And once you do, this mind body problem, well, it's obviously not a problem. The mind body problem itself is a mistake. Once you get rid of this folk psychology, you can see, well, there just is the brain, right? There just is the brain. There's nothing more. We should just have a better understanding of neuroscience. So, how is this different from identity theory then? Well, the identity theorists wanted to claim that mental phenomena like beliefs, feelings, experiences, etc., are brain states. But eliminativists are saying there just is no such thing, mental phenomena. There's just the brain. There's nothing more. So the identity theorist seems capable of respecting at least a conceptual difference between the mental and the physical, though at the end of the day, they are realized in substance physically. The eliminativist is getting rid of even the conceptual importance of mental phenomena. The conceptual importance of mental phenomena is zero for the eliminative materialist. It is a mistaken way of thinking. So, what's a belief for an eliminativist? It's an antiquated notion. There's just brain stuff. That's it. Okay, so to sum up, last week and this week, we had an extremely short introduction to the philosophy of mind. It's vastly an understatement to say that you could take an entire class on just this topic. In fact, we have them at this university if you're interested. And still, at this level, not cover everything there is to cover. Right? So, in our 2 weeks, we have not by any means exhausted all the positions, all the relevant topics. For example, we didn't discuss the problem of other minds. That is, how do we know whether or not other people have minds? The possibility of artificial intelligence, whether or not minds are possible without bodies, and much more. Like, we did not come to any kind of consensus about this qualia issue. We didn't come into any kind of consensus about the mind body problem. There's so many more things to discuss, but we simply don't have time. So, hopefully, you've at least enjoyed uh, uh, getting to see what a variety of the positions are like, right? At least what the major views are saying as to what the mind is, what the ultimate nature of the mind has to be. Looking forward, we're going to start talking about personal identity. It kind of builds on the topic we just had. So, personal identity in philosophy has to do with what makes you the same person over time, right? So we've talked about, well, what makes a mind, right? What is the nature of the mind? Now we're going to explore the topic, what makes you, right? So we're going to look into that next time. But until then, stay healthy, stay safe.